Are you stuck in the cycle of over-restricting your diet to manage stomach symptoms like reflux, heartburn, and nausea? In today's episode, we're breaking down why extreme food elimination might actually be holding you back from healing and what you can do instead to find food freedom while managing your symptoms. I'll share actionable steps to personalize your diet, reduce food fear, and finally start healing without unnecessary restriction. Let's dive in. Hey there, I'm Jessica Washington, a former gut health patient turned functional nutrition practitioner, and I am on a mission to help you finally say goodbye to stubborn stomach symptoms and reclaim your life with confidence. On the Getting Well Again podcast, we dive deep into the root causes of gut issues, sharing real strategies that actually work to help you feel like yourself again. Healing your stomach is about so much more than just protocols. So get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's dive into this journey to lasting gut health together. And as a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a replacement for medical advice or treatment. So this is a hot topic. Today we are talking about food and stomach symptoms. However, I am going to give you an answer that you might not like at first. It's not going to be just a blanket diet recommendation. I'm not going to say, here, eat this, avoid that. But I hope that once you make it all the way through the episode, you will come to understand that my more out-of-the-box views on food are actually the most beneficial in the long run. So again, I'm not just going to share a list of foods that you should eat and a list of foods that you should avoid if you have symptoms like reflux, heartburn, stomach pain, or nausea, because honestly, it isn't that simple, and there isn't just a blanket recommendation for everyone. What I've found from working with clients is that diet is highly individualized, especially in people with stomach symptoms, and me giving you a list of foods to avoid will not be the most beneficial for your symptom resolution. Instead, today, I want to talk about one of the biggest mistakes that I see clients make with their diet. And then I will give you some actionable steps to help you avoid that mistake and be able to eat more freely without symptoms. One of the biggest things I see with clients that keeps them from being able to get rid of their stomach symptoms and heal from H. pylori is that they are way overly restricting their diet. And what I mean by this is that they are eliminating foods from their diet because either they have read online that they shouldn't be eating fill in the blank food when they have reflux or heartburn, or maybe they have experienced symptoms after meals and have correlated those symptoms with eating this certain food. And if this sounds like you and your experience while trying to manage your stomach symptoms with your diet, this is actually what could be holding you back from finding the symptom resolution that you're looking for. And if this is you, I don't fault you for it. I was definitely there myself too. It makes a lot of sense that if you notice specific foods, or maybe even groups of foods, or sometimes it might seem like every food is causing your symptoms to worsen. I totally understand why, and I've been there too, why it seems like removing that food from your diet seems like a good idea. However, I've seen so many times, both in myself and with clients, that this approach to managing symptoms can get way out of hand really quickly, because when removing foods from your diet is your best and really sometimes only way of managing symptoms, all of a sudden you can be left with only a handful of safe foods and a whole lot of food issues to sort out if you ever want to get back to eating normally again. And then on top of that, you're spending all of your time and energy trying to figure out what foods are causing your symptoms and how you can eat to feel better, that you are putting so much undue stress on your body that it's making it impossible to heal. I know from experience how many times and how long I have spent on Google just trying to find the perfect diet, or trying to Google, why is this food making me feel this way? And it's a lot mentally. And so by doing this and using restriction in food as the primary means of managing your symptoms, you're really just unknowingly sabotaging your healing potential by restricting your food and by putting all of this mental, physical, emotional stress on your body. And so think about it. How many times have you gone down a rabbit hole of what did I eat after you experience a symptom flare post-meal? trying to pinpoint the exact food that caused your increase in heartburn, your increase in reflux, nausea, stomach pain, whatever it is for you. And then once you do get that food identified, you avoid it maybe for the next week, only to still frustratingly have symptom flares. I know that was my experience many times. I was like, I thought I figured out what was causing my symptoms, and it turns out I'm still having symptoms. So then, if you're like me, maybe you say, screw it, and you eat that food that you thought you had figured out was causing you symptoms again, and you're totally fine. You have no symptoms. And so it's just a massively confusing cycle that creates so much stress and unnecessary food fear and causes you to restrict foods that really aren't the problem. And I know your intentions are good. Again, I say this from experience. I was someone who was so afraid of food that at my worst, I was eating the same 3 meals every single day and probably had 10 safe foods. It was a problem. And I was stuck here because of a few reasons, and maybe these are the reasons that you are feeling stuck with your diet right now too. So first, I had been experiencing intense symptoms after eating. Food just didn't make me feel good, and I was able to identify a few foods, things like apples, garlic, and avocados, that really flared my symptoms. And so I noticed a significant increase in my symptoms after eating those foods. So of course, I avoided those foods. And then I did what anyone in that situation would do. I turned to Dr. Google, and I found that all of those foods, the apples, the garlic, and the avocados, they were all high in FODMAPs. So then I decided to go on a full low FODMAP diet and restrict or eliminate other foods that were also high in FODMAPs. And if you've ever been on a low FODMAP diet before, you'll know that it's a pretty restrictive diet. So many plant foods and grains are high in FODMAPs, so I was left with really not too much to pick from. And I thought I was doing the right thing by fully following this diet. I was having symptoms, and they were obviously caused by food, and then they were obviously caused by some foods that were high in FODMAPs. So I thought that removing all of the offending food in those categories would make my symptoms better. And maybe you've been there too. Maybe you found the gastritis healing diet, or the acid watcher diet, or some other blanket diet recommendations online, and started cutting out all of the recommended foods. And when we are in the midst of trying to manage debilitating symptoms and feel somewhat normal as we go about our day, it can be so easy to just hold on to anything that promises fewer symptoms. And restrictive diets do a great job of promising to improve health and reduce symptoms, but you have to weigh the cost of that promise. And so for me, following this blanket low FODMAP diet not only impacted my ability to eat enough food and fuel my body properly, but it also really impacted me mentally as well. I remember going out to eat at Chipotle with my boss one day and sitting there just picking out all of the onions from my bowl, and she probably thought I was insane and a complete crazy person, and that intense fear of all high FODMAP foods made it so hard for me to live a normal life where I could go out to eat with people and not have to do crazy things like sift through my chicken bowl. I remember after doing that, eating that meal, still feeling tired, still having brain fog, feeling bloated. Even despite my best efforts to stick to my low FODMAP plan, picking out all of those onions, I still had symptoms. And so, was that blanket diet serving me, or would it have been better off just avoiding the foods that I knew bothered me and having freedom everywhere else? And then the second thing that got me really stuck with my diet was that a nutritionist I started working with recommended that I go even stricter with my food elimination and start on what is called an SCD diet. This is a very intense healing diet meant for people with IBD and other serious GI conditions. Why she recommended this diet to me when I did not have that, I'm not really sure. I can guess that she was trying to help promote healing, which is great. But this further diet restriction actually had the exact opposite effect of what she intended. I was now up to my eyeballs in food restriction. I could no longer eat bread or crackers or pasta or so many foods that I just wasn't reacting to in general. It's just that they didn't fit inside this SCD box that I really ended up stressing my body out. I was so scared of food that I was so afraid to deviate from this really strict SCD low FODMAP diet that I just felt stuck, and honestly, I was not feeling any better. And the big problem with food restriction as a primary means of managing symptoms and promoting healing is that a lot of times we end up unintentionally diet stacking, kind of like what I had fallen into, where either we find some healing diet on Google or some new practitioner we start working with recommends another diet to help manage symptoms or reduce inflammation or something else. And then before we know it, we're following 5 different diet recommendations and we've cut out complete food groups that we never had trouble tolerating in the first place. And so if that's what you've been doing to manage your symptoms, I'm here to tell you that this intense restriction is not the only way to healing. You don't need to be so isolated by your diet that you can't keep living your life. Instead, I invite you to do what I always recommend clients do, is just eat what makes you feel good and avoid what doesn't. And this simple approach to dietary management of symptoms has been revolutionary for my clients, and I believe that it can be for you too. Now, you are in complete control of your food choices, not some cookie cutter diet recommendation. You can continue to eat as nutritionally dense, broad, and unrestricted of a diet as possible while still managing your symptoms with foods that you know bother you. And when you make the decision to switch from following a blanket diet recommendation to listening to your body to identify what specific foods impact you, you are going to get so much freedom back in your life. And this type of dietary approach results in a much more relaxed relationship with food, as you can imagine. You can remove the fear from all foods or all food groups and approach your diet with curiosity. Right? You're no longer just avoiding large subsets of food out of fear, but you're now able to get into the mindset of searching for and identifying the specific foods that definitely flare your symptoms. And approaching your diet with this mindset of a scientist and using observation and journaling to pick out the offending foods enables you to keep the broadest possible diet while still controlling your symptoms. Then you can keep living as normal a life as possible while working to resolve your stomach symptoms. Because ultimately, food is not the main issue. Food reactions are just a symptom of some deeper dysfunction going on in your gut. And once you can identify and fully address any bacterial overgrowths or imbalances that may be at the root of your inability to tolerate all food, you will then be able to get back to eating whatever you want, which is the ultimate goal. So now that we've flipped the script a little bit on dietary management of stomach symptoms, let me leave you with some action steps to help you get started shifting from this blanket diet restriction mindset to approaching your dietary limitations with more personalization. So first step, you should really start keeping a food and symptoms journal. So keeping track of what you're eating and what symptoms you experience is the best way to systematically identify any foods that are contributing to your symptoms. And you might have to do this for a few days or weeks in order to see any specific patterns. But the effort you put in here will be well worth it. You will be able to keep eating the largest subset of foods that you can while identifying the ones that are making you feel not so great. And I know it might seem overwhelming at first to try to keep track of foods and what's causing symptoms, but really you'll just want to start looking out for anytime you experience a symptom after eating. If you are observing without judgment or frustration, you will start to notice patterns, I promise. You just have to make it a priority and put in the time and effort to pay attention. And then the second step, which you might already know, but I just had to mention, is that it can be helpful to start by putting your attention on the heavy-hitting foods that tend to bother most people with stomach symptoms and H. pylori. So these are things like spicy foods, tomatoes, fatty and fried foods. And so if you don't know where to start with your food journaling and symptom observation, just start by observing how you feel after eating these foods. And so if you start to notice maybe you feel worse after eating Mexican food or after eating out at a restaurant where the food tends to be higher in fat, you can start putting together those puzzle pieces to ID the foods that you don't do well with right now. And then third, this is really important, you must keep reevaluating your food avoidances. And this is arguably the most important step in this process, because if you skip this part, you can get caught in that diet stacking that I talked about earlier, but instead of diet stacking, you're food stacking. And so you don't want to completely write off a food for forever because you identified it as something that flared your symptoms at one point in time. You have to keep checking in and trying these avoided foods again, or else you will never be able to expand your diet back to normal. And this is especially true if you're also going through a treatment protocol or working on healing your stomach post H. pylori. As your stomach heals, you will be able to tolerate more foods. And if you never test that healing power out, you'll be stuck with a limited diet for longer than you need to. For example, I had a client in my Goodbye Stomach Symptoms program who, for as long as she could remember, had avoided citrus foods, things like lemons and limes and grapefruit. They just flared her symptoms and made her feel worse. So she was just like, I'm not going to eat these anymore. But as we were going through the program together, I recommended that she try some lemon juice and water before meals to see if that could help with her digestion. And so she tried it out and was shocked that not only did the lemon not flare her symptoms like it had before, but that adding in this food before meals actually helped her digestion, and she felt even fewer symptoms after eating because she tried adding this food that had once really bothered her. And so if she had never pushed her food norm, she never would have been able to experience that new level of healing, symptom improvement, and food freedom. So please test out your food restrictions. And then finally, the fourth step to this new approach to eating with stomach symptoms is that it is also important to understand that it really might not be what you're eating that is causing symptoms, but how you are eating. And this is especially true if you're used to eating on the go, while scrolling your phone, or while working, just like doing things other than eating while you're eating. Because in order to digest your food well, your body needs to be in a calm, relaxed state. Your digestive system needs to get the heads up from your brain that it's time to start producing digestive juices and moving the smooth muscles in your intestines. But if you're eating in a state that is less than calm, so if you're eating standing up in a car while watching TV or anything else besides just sitting at a table eating, your brain is never going to get the chance to send those calm, it's time to eat and time to digest signals to your gut, and digestion is not going to happen optimally. And so this alone can result in symptoms like heartburn, stomach pain, and bloating after meals, even for someone without gut infections and without chronic stomach symptoms. So if you are having symptoms after meals, it very well might not be the food. And if you're only looking at food, you might be chasing random foods around for so long in a quest to find the one thing that's bothering you, when instead the fast-paced environment that you're eating in might be the culprit. So if you are having trouble identifying foods that cause symptoms, so if your food and symptom journal is all over the place, you can't seem to pin anything down, definitely take a hard look at your eating environment and see if you can optimize a little bit. Eat at a table, in a calm environment, not in a hurry, and see how that improves your digestion. All right, so in summary, you are not alone if you have been searching for the quote-unquote perfect diet to manage your symptoms and have found yourself stuck in diet restriction and food fear. I know that was me. I've seen it in so many of my clients. So you are not alone, but it also doesn't have to be that way. Just because you have stomach symptoms doesn't automatically mean that you have to live with a restrictive diet and afraid of food. You can heal your stomach and resolve your H. pylori without needing to severely restrict your diet. And the best approach to take is the approach of a scientist when it comes to your symptoms and the foods that cause them. So to do this, start by following these 4 steps that we just went over. Keep a food and symptom journal. Start by observing how you react to the heavy-hitting symptom-producing foods. Reevaluate your identified food triggers every month or so, especially if you are working on treating gut infections or healing your stomach. And finally, don't discount the environment in which you are eating when it comes to symptoms after meals. So I hope this little discussion was eye-opening and helpful, and that you now have the knowledge and tools to get started unrestricting your diet a little bit, if that's right for you, and that you now have the knowledge and tools to get started unrestricting your diet and finding a more personalized approach to the foods that you need to avoid to help manage your symptoms. So please let me know what you thought of this episode. The podcast world can be lonely, so please send me a DM on Instagram at the Gut Healing Ninja. Shoot me an email. I'd love to know your thoughts and your opinions on your diet and whether or not you think this systematic, scientist-based approach can be helpful for you. So I'd love to hear from you, and I will see you next time on the Getting Well Again podcast. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Getting Well Again podcast. If you found today's conversation helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Your feedback really helps others who need this information find the show and start their own healing journey. And if you know someone who'd benefit, please feel free to share this episode with them too. See you next time.